I'm going to speak about the stages of training, what you have to do in order to get to the point where you're a practicing barrister. The role of the inn in that, as a sub-point. Things you can do to increase your chances and you get to increase your familiarity with the skills and attributes you need as a barrister. Also stuff that looks good in a pupillage interview and a scholarship interview. Scholarships themselves and a few other practical bits. That's to give you an outline of what to expect. Right, with that large preamble, let me delve into what you have to do. Obviously, you need to have a law degree. Most of you will get that just by completing your course. If you're on a different degree course, there is a conversion course called the Graduate Diploma in Law. There are some accelerated law degrees. I know Cambridge offers one, but various other universities have also cottoned on to the fact that that's a good thing to do. So instead of the 3 or 4 year degrees, 4 years you spend doing the degree, you only do 2, but it will be a postgraduate course. So one way or another, you end up with a qualifying law degree. It's called a qualifying law degree because it covers 7 core subjects, which are prescribed by the regulator. You'd think by now I remember them all, but I've always got to look them up, so I shan't bother to quote all 7 of them on the understanding that you're all on the law degree course anyway, and you'll get it. Right. Next stage is you do a bar course. It's the vocational stage of training. It's still a college type course. It's the bridge between what you learn at the academic stage and what you need in the practical part of the training and obviously in practice itself now. So it'll be procedural law in civil and crime. It'll be a little bit about the code of conduct, although not as much as it used to be because they shoved it on to a later stage. It will be a lot of practical skills like advocacy training, opinion writing, legal research, negotiation with clients, all those kind of things. It used to be either a choice between a 1-year course or a two-year part-time course. There are now various other models. I shan't go through them in detail, partly because they change year upon year and partly because once you are at the stage of picking your course, you'll have forgotten what I say now, so I'll keep it very general. So the typical conventional course is essentially all the things I've just said, the knowledge-based subjects and the practical subjects integrated into one. There are 2 other courses which separate them out. One of them is actually provided by something called the Inns of Court School of Law, which makes people think that it's actually something the inns themselves are putting on. That's not quite right. The school is linked to the inns, but it's quite independent of everything else we do. So it's you don't benefit by just going there unless you particularly like that course, which personally I think is a good one, but it doesn't suit everybody. That one will separate out the knowledge-based part 1 and skills-based part 2. The part 1 will be purely self-study online. It's a very good online course specifically prepared for this purpose, obviously. You then sit the exams like everybody else, and if you pass, you move on to a much shorter practical part 2. So that's one variation. Also, courses now start at different times of the year. One of them starts in January, another one starts in July. The bulk of it still starts in September. The idea behind all that is that you should be able to be as flexible as you can. Some people will have to work to save money for the course, and if it fits better into your own diary to start at a different time from September, you can now do that. Money is one of those subjects. The bar course is very expensive. It varies between sort of, let's call it 13,000 and 18,000 pounds per year, plus obviously your living expenses. So we are looking at a hell of a lot of money. Until recently, I would have had to say there is no money available in the way you would get for other postgraduate degrees. That has changed slightly in that some of the bar course providers are offering a course which combines the bar course with a master's degree. And then obviously that gives you access to the sort of funding you would get for any master's, unless you've already had one in another subject, in which case obviously it doesn't apply. So there are ways of funding it. An important source of funding is the scholarships from the INS. And there we all of us have the same approach. We all of us have the same deadline, and perhaps this is a good moment to impress that on you, because it's a very early deadline. If you start the course, say in September 24, we will need your application in November 23, and so forth. So it's actually quite at least about 10 months before you start the September course. If you start a January course, it's actually even more than the 10 months. So do watch out for that if you are interested in that. The reason we have such a long run-up is that it's not just you hand in your application and we give you an interview. There's a lot of admin to go before that to get ready for it, and we do need the time to process. This last year, I think we had just under 400 applications, and you can imagine that there is a degree of effort making that work. Hence the very long run up. For the conversion course, we also offer scholarships. Those are a bit shorter, so the interviews for that are in June, and then the applications need to be in early May. So that's usually far fewer applications, so we're a bit more flexible on that. Right, I'll talk about details on the scholarships later on when it comes to sort of preparing, how you can prepare for the thing. So you've got your bar course. You selected your bar course. You then also need to select your IN. You have to become a member of an Inn of Court before you start the bar course. Master Reader has mentioned there are 4 of us. Occasionally people ask, well, how do I decide which one to pick? It's actually quite a difficult one. I mean, I hope you don't think I'm being flippant if I say it's a little bit like Hogwarts. In my experience, people will drift towards the inn which suits them best temperamentally, either because they like the nice hall, because they think people are more relaxed. Each of the inns has got some sort of, shall I say, almost emotional characteristic which will make you click when you go and see it. So you're doing a very good thing by coming here and getting a feel for Middle Temple. If you get a chance, look at the 3 other inns. You may find that that's a good one for you. There's also another way which I would always recommend. I'm going to talk a little bit about mini pupillages later on. One of the things you might want to do if you do those is just talk to other barristers, to the barristers in chambers, and just talk to them about their own inn, about what they think about the other inns. They might sort of slag off the others, but if somebody you don't like slags off Middle Temple, you think, oh, well, if he hates it, maybe that's one for me. So you build up, it's like everything else in life, you build up a sort of palimpsest of impressions from other people. There's never a single answer. You get the opinions of other people, you form your own impression, and you hit on one of them. Maybe you've got a lecturer who says, oh, well, I'm a member of Lincoln's. I think Lincoln's is fantastic. I've always been happy there. And maybe that's an introduction. But it doesn't have to be a personal connection. We'll try and build up the connections for you once you're here. So really go with your instinct about which suits you best. But you have to be a member of one of them at the time you start the course. You can actually join from year 1 of your undergraduate studies, if you like. If you've made up your mind and you decide you like this particular inn, go and join them. The only warning I have to give you there is now a rule that you have to start the course within 5 years of having been admitted to an inn. So that in a way sets the clock rolling. So you join the inn, you do the bar course. Parallel to the bar course, you come to what we now call qualifying sessions. At one stage, it used to be called dinners. Master Reader mentioned that they closed the door and you couldn't leave the dinner before the end of it. And in fact, Master Reader, Master Treasure, and I had a bit of a bitch before we started about the quality of the food at the time. It was still going when I first started working here, and it really was dreadful in those days. It's a lot nicer now. But not all qualifying sessions, in fact, the minority of qualifying sessions are now dinners. Each qualifying session has to have a mixture of a collegiate and an educational element. Last night we had it, as it happens, so Thursday night we did have a dinner. So there was an hour-long lecture on money laundering, rather how money laundering is against the law and not how you do it. Money laundering, and then there were drinks, and then there was a dinner in hall. Rather grand dinner, rather lovely dinner. It's called the private guest night, so people can bring their own guests and people whom perhaps they want to persuade. So that's one example. But often it will be a lecture, or it will be what we call a shout-out conversation, named after one of our great benchers who was a great advocacy teacher. And it'll be two people in conversation about a topic which we think will be of interest both to students and lawyers, but which is of wider relevance for society. So it could be something about, does prison work, the role of judges in fragile democracies, a whole range of things. If you're interested in that, have a look at our website just to get a feel for what goes on. It's under events. It will give you a list of all the qualifying sessions. But the point of it, you've got to do 10 of those, I should say, before you can qualify. Many people do more than 10 because it is, if I say so myself, really quite a good program and very interesting and highly subsidized, so you're not spending a ton of money on it. The idea is the bar course gives you the knowledge and skills which can be examined, which you need to be able to do in order to succeed at the profession. The inn, if that's not too cheesy a thing to say, is your introduction to the professional family. There is a close-knit community. I know this is one of those things which is very easy to say and say, yeah. You know, it's like the PR gag, but it is a close community, and the more you experience it, the more you will become part of it. One of the qualifying sessions we do is residential weekends. We do 4 of those a year, and in a way, they're perhaps the most intense way of getting into it, and those you are a member of the professional community. You'll be there as a student, obviously the most junior of our membership, but you're on a sort of spectrum of professional progress. So you will have more experienced barristers. You will have very experienced barristers like Master Reader, who's been in Silk, has been a QC for very many years, and is one of our most experienced criminal practitioners. You may have a Supreme Court judge, if you're lucky. That happens sometimes. Last time we went, we had 2 members of the Court of Appeal, and it all sounds very intimidating, but once you've had breakfast with these guys, it all becomes a little bit more accessible, and you recognize that really you're all part of the same team. And more importantly, they think we're all part of the same team. So that's really the thinking behind becoming a member of the Inn. Interestingly, without wanting to beat our own drum too much, but a few years ago, the Bar Standards Board, which is our regulator, ran a consultation about whether membership of an Inn should remain compulsory for students, because the Bar Standards Board sort of was very suspicious of us, thinking, we're just sort of a really old fuddy-duddy sort of outfit where, nobody in their right minds would voluntarily join. And much to my delight, a lot of our students wrote in and said, don't abolish it. I learned a lot at the Inn. They helped me tremendously. I probably wouldn't have joined if I hadn't had to, but boy, am I glad that I did. So it remains as a requirement, and I'm very grateful it does. Right, so that's the Inn. So you're on your vocational stage, you've become familiar with the Inn, you've done your qualifying session, you've passed your exams. You then move on to pupillage. Pupillage is the last stage of training, 12 months. Can be done part-time theoretically, but I have yet to hear of a provider or of a pupil who has actually opted for that method. So I can't tell you much about how that would work. So typically it will be a 12 months training, first 6 months, really observing, supporting your pupil supervisor, doing a bit of research, carrying on learning, but obviously very closely related to real practice then. And in the second 6 months, you have got what's called the provisional practicing certificate, and you actually do start going to court. Obviously, at that stage, with fairly modest cases, it could be a magistrate's court, it could be an appearance in a Crown Court where you try to move a date on behalf of your pupil supervisor or another member of chambers. So it's really the stage where you get the hang of what it's like being in practice. The Inn still plays a part there. In the first 6 months, you have to undertake an advocacy course, which the Inns provide, Inns and circuits. I'll talk about circuits in a minute. So you'll have to attend that. After that, after the 12 months, you can be up and running, and you find your place, you get your tenancy in chambers, or you get a contract at the employed bar. And off you go, and that's the end of your formal training. There will be continuing professional development, but I don't think I need to bother you about that at this stage. Now, pupillage. That's the real difficulty at the minute. You've probably, anybody who has sort of looked into the practicalities of training for the bar has probably picked up on that already. There are currently about 1,800 people, between the four Inns, about 1,800 people on the bar course. Now, a good number will return to overseas jurisdictions, as you have heard. Hard to say how many, because there isn't a central register kept. Here at Middle, about just over half of our students tend to be from overseas. Lincoln's Inn, same thing. The other two, Grace and Inner, haven't got anywhere near as many, but I can't tell you what the overall number is. And of course, the number itself doesn't tell you much, because somebody might be from overseas and still want to practice in this country. So it doesn't help as much. But I do know hundreds and hundreds will return overseas. However, a lot of people obviously are still going to compete for pupillage in England and Wales. Now, 1,800 in all. All right, some people may fail, some people will return to overseas jurisdiction, but there are only about, it varies from year to year, about 400 pupillages. 3 years ago it was 500, then it dropped to just over 300 because of COVID. This year it's, I think, about 400. We haven't got the final number yet, because obviously they come on stream as we go along. But the fact remains, not enough pupillages to accommodate everybody who successfully passes the bar course. So a tricky one to cope with. It requires you to be absolutely sure that this is what you want to do. It's not something where you say, oh, well, you know, I'll do the bar course and then we'll see whether I pick up a pupillage. Unless you're really determined that this is what you want to do, I would advise you not to risk it. If you do want to do it, go for it. When I look at the students and our junior members who do eventually get a pupillage, it'll always be the ones who are absolutely passionate about wanting to do this career, who really have got that goal, who will not be deterred, who are feisty enough to try again and again. And I have to say, unfortunately, it's likely to be again and again. Most people I know will have at least a 2-year gap between end of the bar course and the start of pupillage. It could be more than that. You've got 5 years to find pupillage, 5 years after the bar course, and some people actually do need the full 5 years, which may sound completely off-putting. Don't look at it as off-putting. Most people will do something really interesting and useful between the end of the bar course and the start of pupillage. I mean, you could work for a solicitor's firm. as a paralegal. People work in, I don't know, the law department of an insurance company, or anything law related will stand you in good stead, because it builds your experience. It makes you a more confident person, really, because the more life experience you have, the better you come across in a pupillage interview. And of course, the better you come across in court and with your lay client and with your solicitor. If you're sort of very fresh out of bar school, however much you know theoretically, quite often people will not have the oomph to stand up to difficult clients, difficult judges, difficult solicitors, an angry clerk. It's a very stressful profession, and you have to be able to cope at every stage and not be intimidated by what goes on. So, and my personal view is that you're more likely to be able to do that if you have seen a little bit more than just school, university, bar school, pupillage. So don't be disheartened by having to try for a few years, but do be aware that it's not going to be a walk in the park getting that. Now, I told you I was going to talk about scholarships. In order to apply for the scholarships, each of the INs will have interviews. They're very short, they're about 15 minutes. So you got to be ready for that test and selling yourself. Here at Middle, and actually at Inner, excuse me, we interview every applicant on the basis that if you want to be an advocate, we want to see your advocacy, and people will advocate on their own behalf, probably more successfully than they just do it in writing. But it is a short interview, so do make sure you've got enough to put into your written application as well, and take the trouble to do it properly. The same obviously goes for pupillage applications. So think about all these things very carefully. Now, what do you need to put in there? The criteria, which all four INs have got broadly the same ones, even though we word it slightly differently and possibly they are weighted slightly differently, but essentially we want academic excellence. If you got a 2-2, don't. I know every year there may be 5 people who do get a pupillage with a 2-2, but it's really not worth the candle. Chambers are inundated with fantastic applications. Academic achievement will be one of them. So make sure you get at least a 2-1. I know I've just talked about Chambers, and when I started talking about scholarship applications, but it's the same for all these things. So academic excellence is really important. Motivation, and I'll tell you a little bit about what you can do to demonstrate that. Aptitude as an advocate, well, that will be write properly, write succinctly, and to the point in your application form. Make sure you can show that you can actually get across what you want to say in an economic and persuasive manner. That's advocacy at every stage of your career. So start demonstrating it in the application form. The final one is sort of general life aptitude. That's actually, do you have integrity? Are you a good self-starter? Are you disciplined? Are you reliable? Can you work with people? Can you work on your own without having to be jostled along at every stage? Those are the kind of things which obviously are a lot more difficult to get out in an interview. I mean, how do you demonstrate that? That's where it's important to think about whom you want as a referee, and that the referee can say all these things which you need to demonstrate. Not all of them, but to the extent they can. So there is a little bit of meat in your application. Now, the one thing I want to spend a bit more time on is motivation, because that will go into what I said I was going to talk about, things you can do to prepare yourself. And that's everything to demonstrate that you've worked on becoming an advocate, or on finding out about advocacy, and about finding out about the profession. I can't tell you, I sit in on scholarship interviews and as the clerk to the interviewing panel. And the number of people who said, oh, it's my life, I've wanted to be a barrister since I was 8 years old, it's just, the one thing I want to do. Turns out they've never been inside a court. I don't actually know how that works, I mean, I know we had Judge the cabinet QC and all that, but it's not quite the same thing. So going to court, getting a work experience with a barrister in barristers' chambers called mini pupillages, as you know. Also go to a solicitor's firm for a week. Who knows? Maybe you prefer being a solicitor. You're still in a working environment, and you can actually even be an advocate there. But it's a completely different context. There's nothing magical about being a barrister as such. It's not that the barristers are the stars and the solicitors are the footmen, as it were. It's not like that. They're two parts of the same profession, and you need to find out which one suits you best and where you're likely to feel more comfortable. Because if you don't feel comfortable, you're not going to be good at it. And even if you're absolutely sure you want to be a barrister, go and work for a solicitor for a few days in your holidays, because you'll probably be asked at some stage, either in the scholarship interview or in the pupillage interview, so why the bar, why not a solicitor? And you need to be able to have an answer, and you'll have that answer if you've actually seen both parts of it. So give yourself that experience. Mini pupillage is more difficult to come by, I'm sorry to say, because of course COVID has changed the whole working pattern for so many people. But try to get at least into one or two chambers at some stage, and then find out what the day-to-day life is like. You can't help finding out because you'll see it all around you. You see them rushing about and panicking about hearings and panicking about where the papers are and all that. So get a feel for what it's like. And as I said before, talk to them about, not just about the case, but about about what got them there, about what they hate, what they like about their job, what they hate about the job, what they wish they had known before they started, those kind of things, just building up the picture in your own mind. Again, go to court, that's the simplest thing of all, really. Hearings are in the public domain. You don't have to hear the whole case. If you've got a couple of, I'm sure you're all at universities where there is a court either in town or not far away. So go and sit in for an afternoon or half an afternoon if you're in town anyway. One thing which you may think I'm sort of preaching to the converted here and sort of being absolutely obvious about it, but I'll say it anyway. Do keep a work diary. Make a note of what you've seen in court. If you do a mini pupillage, which chambers was it? Or which solicitor's firm was it? What sort of cases did I see? If you go to court, what was the case about? Did I see any really good advocacy? Why was it good? What made it good? Did I see any really lousy advocacy? That happens, believe me. Why was it lousy? Why did you take 10 questions to ask to get one single thing out? So train yourself to watch out for these things and make a note of it. The reason that's important is that I promise you, when you do go for an interview, somebody will say, oh, I see you've done a mini pupillage in Fountain Court. What did you see? And all you remember in the heat of the moment is that the barrister bought you a cup of coffee every morning, but what was the case? What was his name? And then 10 minutes later, you'll remember, but you want it there. So if you keep a record of all these things, read through them before you make an application, before you go into interviews and so forth. That's one thing. The other thing is also that obviously it will just teach you to be to pay attention and to make a note of these things. That's just by the by. Another thing, mooting. Has anyone done mooting? Good number, good show. You should really be able to say that you've done some mooting or debating. Debating is a different skill, but comparable at least in that it forces you to have thought on your feet, get a bit used to public speaking and so forth. Another thing is teach yourself to look out for all those kind of skills you acquire, perhaps even when you do a holiday job. I don't know. You might say you answer the phone in an insurance company in your holiday job, which doesn't sound like that's particularly demanding, but it will teach you to listen to upset clients, because typically, I suppose, people will ring you up who've just been burgled or something dreadful happened to them, so they're worried about it and they'll go blah, 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 blah. So you've got to find out, you've got to calm them down, you've got to find out what the issue is, you've got to work out which department you send them, you refer them to, you might have to give them a little bit of advice. These are all skills which you will need as a barrister. If you work in a complaints department somewhere, even if you work at the supermarket checkout, there will be aspects to that role which you can distill into something which can go into your application. So think about all these things. I won't give you tons of examples now, because otherwise everybody will want to work for a complaints department. They'll say exactly what I've just said. And obviously, that's not the point. But teach yourself to think carefully about what you do and how it relates to what you are going to need later on. Thank you.